Are you ready to get started? All right, we'll get started. Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to give you a brief run-through of the Library of Congress Authorities website. You have an assignment in which you're supposed to look up a few things. This site can be a little bit confusing the first time you look at it. If you don't know what you're looking for, it's easy to kind of get turned around and go in circles. So I'm just going to give you a very few brief hints about how to use it, what it is, and so on. So let's get started. I'd like to begin by suggesting you read the Frequently Asked Questions page. This will answer a lot of your questions about what the authority records are, how they're organized, some things you can and can't do with them. So first take a look and read this page. Read these responses, and that'll give you a little bit of an orientation. The next thing I'd like you to take a look at is the actual format for an authority record. Many of you are familiar with the MARC record format for books, the bibliographic records. If not, you'll certainly learn about those more as you go along in the program. But you may recall that there are a series of 3-digit numbers. Each number refers to a particular type of information. There are a lot of codes and subcodes. It's fairly complex. The authority record is also a MARC standard. It's similar to the bibliographic record in that... Really? You sure? Okay, it's similar to the bibliographic record in that it still has a series of 3-digit numbers. And these numbers correspond to information, but they correspond to information particular to an authority record. So if you take a look at the format summary from this page, you'll see the general outline of the kinds of data that go in the MARC record, the MARC authority record. You can browse through these. We're going to be interested in 3 primary locations. The 1XX, which is the heading record. This is the official heading. And then there are a couple of cross-references. These are called tracing records and references. These are 4XX and 5XX numbers. If we go back here and take a look, tracings and references, general information, we'll see how these break out. So here are the 400, the 4XX from tracings, and the 5XX, see also from tracings. The difference between these two is as follows. It's explained down below. The 4XX field leads from an unauthorized heading to an authorized heading. So an unauthorized heading is a term that's not commonly used or that is not a preferred term, and that leads to our authorized heading. So when you see those, you can go from one heading to another. The 5XX is also a tracing record. The field leads from one authorized heading to another authorized heading. So in this case, the 5XX may lead to a 1XX record, and the 5XX record can also appear in the 1XX record. These are authorized headings, so these kind of go back and forth. We'll see how that works in just a minute. Anyway, take a look at these. You can skim these others as you find interesting. And now let's take a look at what this means in practice and how you might look some of these things up. So let's go to the Library of Congress homepage. Then we'll go to the library catalog and we'll search for a book. And I'm going to key in Huckleberry Finn. Most of you know this work, commonly ascribed to Mark Twain. Mark Twain, of course, is a synonym for Samuel Clemens. If you know this work, then you know what I'm talking about. If you're not familiar with it, then it still serves as a good example. So we'll search for this book. Here we find a number of returns. The one that we want, turns out the Library of Congress has this 1884 edition of Mark Twain, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, cataloged, and so we'll take a look at this record. Here's the full record, the kind of friendly display of the record. We see that we have a personal name. That's one of the types of authority name records that we have in authorities, so we'll take a look at that in more detail in a minute. We have a uniform title. You might begin to suspect that these are both controlled vocabulary names from the table of authorities, and you'd be right. We'll see how we can look at those in a second. The other information, of course, from the record, subjects, As a matter of fact, these are also controlled vocabularies. This is from the authorities subject headings, also known as the Library of Congress subject headings that you've talked about previously. It's useful to look at the mark tags. Now, these are the mark tags for the bibliographic record for the book. And so we go through here and look at this, and one of the things we look at down here is the 100 tag. This is a personal name, Mark Twain. It's formatted last name, comma, first name. This is where the author of a work goes if it's a personal name, and you might think that that might be something we'd want to check out in the authority tables. So let's go ahead and copy this name. Let's go to the Library of Congress authorities, and we'll search authorities. We'll paste in that name, and we'll select Name Authority headings. Now, subject authority headings, of course, would be the Library of Congress subject headings. There are also title authority headings. I think, as you recall from the previous screen, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was the authorized title. You can experiment with this on your own. We're just going to briefly go through what the name authority headings look like. So we'll begin the search. And here's our return, and we see we do have a number of records here. The first one up here is probably the one that we're going to want to take a look at. This is authorized with references and notes. There are 1,544 bibliographic records. It is a personal name. Scanning down some of these others, we see Twain Mark Media. That's a corporate name. We see Mrs. Mark Twain. If you're interested on your own time, you might go through that. There are a number of aliases for Mrs. Mark Twain. Of course, that was Mrs. Samuel Clemens, but I get ahead of myself. Let's take a look at this authority record and see what we've got. The first thing that pops up is that we have a source of headings, Library of Congress Online Catalog, information for Twain, Mark, 1835 to 1910. That's the official heading as it was formatted in the bibliographic record, which shouldn't surprise you. And we can select a number of these to continue with the authority record, the scope note, and then the see also. So we'll take a look first at the authority record. The authority record, we see here that the heading, which is a 1XX, 100 level heading, is this one that we saw. This is the one that was used in the bibliographic record to indicate the author that we're talking about. But you can see also that there are some search also under. These are these other references, the 5XX, and recall that the 5XX leads to other authority records. So that tells us there's an authority record for Samuel Longhorn Clemens, which was Mark Twain's real name. Mark Twain was the pen name. A couple of other references, Louis de Conte and Quintus Curtius Snodgrass. You might take a look at those if you're interested. Those are other authority records. We'll take a look at this one, the heading record, for just to see what that looks like. And here's the heading record. This is the authority record now. This is the record for the author, not for the particular book. You can trace back some of these numbers. Recall that the 400 level numbers were references from unauthorized headings, ones that aren't used. A lot of these are the way the name is spelled in different kinds of languages. So we have a number of records here, ways of encoding that name in other languages. We have here our 500 level records. If we go back up to the top, we can see this permalink. This refers to a record that you can refer to, will always be here. That gives us a nice presentation of that particular record in sort of a descriptive English format. So take a look at that. Let's backtrack a little now, and we'll move back from these pages to our first result. And I want you to note a couple of other things. We have something very similar down here, Mark Twain, 1835-1910, with the parentheses spirit. If we take a look at that, it is an authorized heading. And let's see what that actually is all about. Heading 1XX, Mark Twain, and so on. Let's take a look at that. And it turns out, if you track this through, that Mark Twain was actually quoted as having authored things by virtue of a spirit medium. So this is a record that indicates that this is the name, the official way to indicate Mark Twain, the author, as represented by Robert Leichtman through mediumship as Mark Twain's spirit. And so this is a recognized authority record, and it differentiates between Mark Twain, the author, as represented by Dr. Leichtman through spirit medium, and Mark Twain, the author, the human being as we know him. So that gives you a little bit of background on the depth to which some of these authority records go. Let's briefly take another example. This time I'm going to key in the name of a corporation. And again, we're going to go to Name Authority headings, begin our search. So we see General Motors. It is a corporate name, General Motors Acceptance Corporation. These are all references. These are authorized headings. Depends on what you want. All of these may refer to different aspects of the corporation. The one that appears to be used the most, it's authorized, and there are references, 104 bibliographic records referring to General Motors Corporation. Let's take a quick look at that. And we see that there is an authority record, and we have a number of see alsos. So what we'll find out if we track through these is that these are various companies that either were General Motors or General Motors subsidiaries. Elmore Manufacturing Company is a company that General Motors actually bought very early on. And so that's a reference, Elmore Manufacturing Company. If we click on that, we can see that that is a authority record. Take a look at it. It's a 100-1XX, so Elmore Manufacturing has a 1XX with a 5XX reference to General Motors Corporation. Now let's go back to General Motors. Now we'll go back and take this General Motors Corporation, and we'll take a look at the authority record for that. And we'll see that General Motors is the 1XX reference in the General Motors Corporation authority record, and it lists Elmore Manufacturing as the 5XX. So you can see how these refer back and forth to each other. So let's go back and see how you might have gone astray. One way you might go astray is not to enter the name the way the authority's website wants you to enter it. And it's actually not a mistake. It tells you some different information. Suppose we entered Mark Twain, just like that, first name, last name. That might be a way that you might think you could find it. And it actually turns out that it would be hard to find Mark Twain, the author, authority record going at it that way, and we'll see why. What we're turning up with are a number of corporate names that actually do begin Mark Twain rather than Twain, comma, Mark. So now we're looking at these corporate names. They start with Mark and end in Twain. And you could scroll down here quite a ways and get very confused as to why Mark Twain, the author, authority record wasn't showing up. And that's the simple reason for it, is it's doing exactly what you're telling it to do. So I think I'll stop here and let you experiment on your own. Be sure to track these through when you go through and look at authorized headings, track through the records, track through the individual items, track through their permalinks so that you can see the records. Take a look at a few different resources from the Library of Congress online catalog. Recall that we wanted to look at the books here. And see where these different names are located in the Mark record, and then track them through the authority. And I think you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. So that would conclude it. Thanks for watching, and good luck searching.